All right. Well, hi, everyone. Excited that you're here. Let's jump right into it. Uh, Really quickly, uh, I am Taylor. I am a software engineer at Varsity. And if this is the first time that you're joining us, welcome. Varsity is we're a B Corp. We work with a lot of nonprofits and educational institutions, religious organizations, um, social impact organizations, just, those kinds of organizations, mostly in California, but we serve pretty much anyone here in the US, just to equip them with the tools and resources and support they need to be successful in their endeavors. And today, we're going to cover all things related to tech planning. And mostly, there's going to be three sections to this. We're going to talk about like a simple planning framework for your tech projects. We're going to walk through a fictional case study, but when I say fictional, it's really like heavily inspired by real world projects, right? And then I'm going to give you guys a planning worksheet that you can take home, so that if you have any tech projects that you're planning to start soon, or something that you can use sometime in the future, whatever the case may be, I want to make sure that you at least have like something, some like tangible thing that you can take with you, to help walk you through your next tech project. Now, when I say tech project, right, you probably saw the title of the webinar, maybe you saw some promotional materials, whatever it may be. But I just want to disambiguify or define like what does tech project really mean? Um, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because we're going to be using that term a lot here. When I say tech projects, it's just really any effort to use tech to improve your organization, maybe how it works internally, maybe how it communicates with your clients, um, or maybe it's in your service delivery. And that can mean a lot of different things. Some examples include maybe you have a website that you're launching, maybe you have a website that already exists but you're redesigning it, maybe you're adding a chat bot or something like that, whatever. And that aids or improves your overall client outreach and service delivery. Maybe you're implementing multi-factor authentication. And if you don't know what that is, glad you're here. You should use it if you aren't already. MFA just means, like how you log into some websites and they send you a code, or maybe you have like an authenticator app on your phone and you type in the code when it asks you, right? That's all MFA is, multi-factor authentication. It just hardens your overall security, right? Super important. Or maybe you have, a bunch of systems for nonprofits specifically. I see a lot of organizations use HubSpot and Razor's Edge, Voter Voice, Excel workbooks, whatever. They have all these different systems, and they need to sync data. Maybe they need to generate some reports or something like that. And it's really challenging to do that. And so they work to sync data, maybe consolidate all that data into one platform. And that can help again, with operations and internal efficiency. And this is blue for a reason. We're going to touch on this later. Now, a new tech project doesn't just emerge out of nowhere. There's usually something that triggers a new tech project, right? Two really common ones is there's recurring manual work that can be automated or improved in some way. Another one is, hey, there's some requirements, some external need that we need to satisfy, maybe from a stakeholder or funder. Maybe there's a mandate. There's a new law. An organization that I worked with a few years ago, there was some new legislation that passed, and they had terabytes of information that they needed to report on every single month. Like that's a massive undertaking. Not something that they necessarily thought, like they didn't anticipate that need. It just kind of happened. It was external, right? Unplanned. And of course, there's a bunch of other reasons why, maybe you just got some feedback from, maybe it's someone on staff or a volunteer, maybe it's a client. When you see the term end user, by the way, that's just like your target audience. So like an end user for, like HubSpot, that the end users are usually your staff, right? If you have like an online intake form, your end user, those are the clients that you're serving, whoever that may be. Your organization may be facing one of the best problems it could ever face, and that's, hey man, we're growing fast, and we're starting to experience some new problems that we have to solve, right? It could be cost related, or it could just be, hey, tech, it's aging, or maybe you're using a different vendor now, right? Could be all kinds of reasons, but the two ones that I see the most are usually recurring manual work, or there's some external thing, a new requirement that the organization needs to react to and solve for. Now, when we talk about tech planning, it's a pretty simple concept. I think everyone here will do planning to some degree, right? There's like some project that you start, you kind of just don't go into it. We all plan because it's important, right? But like, how important is it? Why is it so important? Well, something that I've seen a lot is we tend to blame technology because it's easy to blame the tech, because maybe we don't understand the technology, maybe we misinterpreted requirements or didn't understand the requirements. Like we think, oh, the planning part, it's so easy. There's no way, like we didn't plan for this. Oh, it's the technology. But I can say confidently, statistically speaking, technology does not cause project failures. In fact, we even have studies that have been running for decades. Like there's one called the Standish Group Chaos Report, if you're interested. It's been running for 3 decades, since 1994, so more than 3 decades. They've been doing this study to see, hey, why do so many of these tech projects fail? And there's actually 3 common causes: unclear requirements, no or lack of end user involvement, and just straight up unrealistic expectations. You can do everything right, but if you're too aggressive, things are going to fail, because typically we don't plan for like real world scenarios or the human factor. It's one thing to read a textbook about football and know all the concepts about how to execute a football play or whatever. It's another thing to actually go on the field and play some football. Not that I know anything about playing football, but it's just an analogy, right? And so without proper, thorough planning, you risk building the wrong solution, or even worse, a really elegant solution to a really simple problem. And this one's almost worse because it can be even more difficult to know that your project didn't go well because you built this really elegant solution and it's technically working, but all you're doing is just further sort of amplifying an existing inefficiency. That one is really difficult to solve for. And so it's best to not be in that situation to begin with, right? All right. So this is why planning is so important. So let's talk about, well, how the heck do I plan for a tech project, right? Well, just follow a framework. And a framework, it's just like a set of rules and guidelines, right? It's a policy, right? We have HR policies for when an employee is onboarded and offboarded, or if we engage with a new donor, fundraiser, whatever. We have all these policies, right? It's these set of rules and guidelines that we follow, right? Well, we have the same thing for tech planning. And there's a bunch of frameworks that you can follow. I'm not saying this is the only correct framework or guidelines that you can follow. What we're going to talk about today, what I want to talk to you about, is really just what I've seen work best, specifically for nonprofits, educational institutions, healthcare organizations, so social impact organizations, the kind of people that I work with a lot. And there's really 7 key ideas to this framework. And we're going to talk about each one. We're going to decompose it, define it, provide some examples, all that. So not to overload you, but we're going to talk about these things. One is define what the project is, what your goals are. We're going to talk about discovery, requirements gathering, talk about what success looks like. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. Stakeholder and decision makers, it's important to assign roles to people. You have a plan of action and milestones, sustainability and support, and of course, organizational readiness. Like, hey, you did it the other 6 things, but the last one, the 7th one, organizational readiness, determines, are you actually ready to take this on? It's one thing to have everything documented and have your ducks in a row, but is now the right time? Because it may not be. So let's jump into the first one. First and foremost, you have to define your problem. Those 3 words are incredibly hard to do. We're probably going to talk about this the most during this webinar because it is the most challenging aspect of this entire process. And it's so much easier to sort of articulate the idea than it is to do in practice. So I'm going to do my best to help you out here. So you need to clearly articulate the specific issue you're addressing so that everyone understands why the heck this tech project even exists. And it has to be specific. Tech projects almost always start as a reaction to something, just like we talked about before. But a purely reactive mindset often leads us to solve the wrong problem or amplify an existing issue, right? Just like we talked about. So instead of reacting with this narrow, tunnel vision, we need to begin with a step back, widen our focus, and purposefully take our time with this. It is so easy to react to something, want to rush to solve the problem because you already have a full docket. You have all these things that you have to worry about. It's so hard to take your time, but you have to be intentional. Block off time in that calendar. Delegate other work. Find some time to do this one and do it well. Because otherwise, you're just going to have even more work to do in the future, right? You have to validate. So once you define your problem, what you think the problem is, let's take a look at that the example that we talked about before, where we have like HubSpot, Razor's Edge, we have all these systems. It takes too long to run reports, or data's inconsistent, it's out of date, whatever, it's inaccurate, right? So let's take that as an example problem. Okay, well, validate. You think, okay, well, that's the problem. Reports are taking forever. Reports are inaccurate. The people are taking too much time to deal with all these different systems. We'll validate it. Look at the data. What does the data say? What does your staff say? It's really important that we focus on gathering context. Gain real, meaningful context into like what the heck your organization is currently doing. And if you do this, and focus on the why and not react, the what, like what the solution is, it'll start to emerge organically. And once you do this and start to really define what's the problem, what's the organization currently doing, what's your staff? And when I say staff, I'm not talking about your leaders and your peers or just the managers. Talk to the frontline staff. Talk to clients. They're the ones who are, the client experience is a product of how your organization functions. Talk to your clients, your end users. And once you've done that, then you can start to narrow your focus. Once you've mapped the landscape, you can then focus on the high value problem. For example, here's a real world example. You want to buy an automation solution like MailChimp or Constant Contact or whatever because your donor engagement on your emails are bad. But you assume, oh, the new software like MailChimp or whatever, oh yeah, it'll improve our low open rates and fix our engagements, and oh, we can have better emails and better designs and all this stuff, right? We can schedule it first thing in the morning, so when our donors log in to Outlook or Gmail, Google Workspace, whatever, Yahoo, that's the first thing they'll see in the morning when they open up their work email. Turns out it has nothing to do with the emails. It's the data. So you just spend all this money, all this work for nothing, because it's just the data. You just had to fix the data. The emails were going to stale email addresses. Your content was great, right? That's a real example. Anyway, I wanted to spend like 5 minutes just on this, because this is the seed that you're planting. Everything else that we're going to talk about is the fruit of the seed that you're planting here. It's so important that you spend your time here. So once you've done that, okay, you figured out what the problem is. Now let's figure out, okay, well, what are your desired outcomes? And be specific. It can be a theme, sure, but it has to be measurable. For example, oh, we want better engagement on our emails, or we want fewer errors. Well, what does that mean? Would be fewer errors, like if we're talking about, hey, this report has all this data and it's inaccurate because it's coming from different sources and staff are manually like running Excel macros or doing whatever to get the job done. The report's inaccurate. We want fewer errors. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does your baseline look like? Does that mean you want fewer than, like, is 5% of your data inaccurate? Maybe your desired outcome is 3% or less. Maybe it's 1%. Maybe you don't want staff to spend 20 hours a week trying to figure out how to run a report, doing all this manual labor. You want it faster. Well, what does faster look like? Or improved efficiency look like? Does that mean they're only spending 10 hours, 2 hours? And make sure that you're using more than one metric. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. So when we say, okay, I want reports to be done faster, or I want quicker turnaround time, if that's the only metric that we use, staff, including you will be encouraged to just work quicker. And when you work quicker, the overall quality of the work being done decreases. So if you have two metrics that kind of sort of go against each other, right? Faster turnaround time and fewer errors, then, okay, well, that kind of forces you to rethink some things. Like, well, how can we do both? Those kind of contradict each other. So you have to be open to rethinking your current processes. Don't try and retrofit your current process into some new software or whatever it is that your outcome is, right? Your tech project can be anything. I'm just using one example here. Don't try and fit the square peg in the round hole. And as always, try to relate the project to your mission statement. Like, does it even align with what you as an organization should be doing? So once you've done that, you've defined the problem, the purpose, and the goals, then you can go into discovery. All right, we know the problem that we're trying to solve. So again, interview end users, your staff, whoever. And for, if you're a leader and if you're in a leadership position, you're not going to get authentic, real feedback. No, trust me, I've been in that position. I've been both a leader and not. Like a manager, like HR manager, and a direct report. You're not going to get real feedback if you have like one-on-one direct conversations, however the medium. What I've found to be really interesting is anonymous surveys, assuming that the staff actually believes it's anonymous and you're not secretly like collecting email addresses or whatever. Be anonymous. Get some candid feedback. Do not assume anything to be true. You have to verify everything for yourself, period. And the reason why is not everyone does what they're supposed to do or what you think they're doing. There could be a policy somewhere, a procedure that's documented somewhere. Hey, this is in SharePoint. Hey, this is some HR policy thing. Everyone's doing it this way, right? No. Absolutely not. There are what we call shadow workflows that happen all the time for whatever reason. Could be staff just literally don't know. Could be staff do know, but they're taking shortcuts because it's just so much easier, right? Have you heard of what's called a desire path before? I don't know why I'm like asking that as if like you can raise your hands and I can see, but maybe you've heard of it. So here in this picture, like we have the concrete sidewalk and it wraps around to the basketball court or whatever that is there, that little concrete slab. But no one's going to do that. People are just going to walk straight through the grass because that's the easiest thing that they can do with, it's not like they're harming really anything. I mean, maybe the grass, but whatever. It's just easier to do it that way. I do the same thing. When I supervise staff, they do the same thing. Everyone does it to some extent. So that's why, again, I say try and be anonymous, try and encourage candid feedback, trying to figure out how we can do that. Because if you do not figure out and make yourself aware of what those shadow workflows are, you can do all this work for your tech project, and then you're going to have all these headaches afterwards because it didn't do this one specific workflow. So for example, like maybe someone has like a Google Sheet somewhere that they use for like, I don't know, manual approvals for something completely outside of your workflow. Whatever. Anyway. Then try and prioritize. Like, what's your nice to haves versus your must haves? This just makes sure that the scope is manageable. You're not going to solve every problem all at once. You want to. I want to. I would love for that to happen, but we can't. So do your best to create what's called an MVP, a minimal viable product, which is just, it's a list of your absolutely necessary things that you need for this project to do. Again, we'll talk about more what that looks like later. All right, number 3, success criteria. This one's fun. So you can't just say, oh, it needs to work better. That is not helpful. You need something that you can measure against. You can have a theme like, hey, it needs to work better. Yeah, sure, you can start with that. But you need to define that a little bit more with actual measurable metrics. And do your best to try and figure out what metrics kind of, don't complement each other. Like we're talking about, hey, faster turnaround time and fewer errors, right? Classic example, because it's really easy to have one, but not both together at the same time. To think really hard about how the heck we can achieve that. So do your best. Don't try to have just one metric, because then that becomes like your goal. Everything that you do is just to make like the number go up or down. It's going to completely defeat the purpose. Establish baselines. I've done this mistake before. We did all this work and we're like, oh, great, it seems to work better, but how much better is it working? It's like, I don't know. We never knew what it was doing before. And there may be some work involved. You may have to build some reports before you even start the project itself. But this is how you figure out, hey, is all of this investment actually solving the problem that we wanted to solve? And again, it's okay to make, I'm going to say, strategic errors and mistakes. Like you may think that this project is going to solve a problem, and you look at all the numbers and it's like, oh, well, it actually didn't solve the problem. But that's, in my opinion, way better, because now you have a well-informed, data-backed insight into, we did all this stuff, we uncovered all these things, and it's still not solving the problem. But now we have all this extra insight that we can use to make well-informed to have well-informed conversations, right? But establish baselines, establish targets. Like, what's like the minimum that you kind of want, like the good, and then what's like the ideal fantasy land best thing? Maybe not fantasy land, right? It has to be like realistic, but you know what I'm trying to say. You got a plan, like who's gonna collect what metric, how often are they gonna do it, and how are they going to disseminate or share that data? Is it a director? Is it the operations person? Is it data analyst? Is it varsity? Right? Whoever, someone has to do it. You have to figure out a cadence. Is it daily, weekly? Is it through email? Whatever. Power BI. All right, this one, probably the easiest of all the things, is how do we break apart a large project into smaller, manageable phases? Let's talk about the project, like the example where you have like 10 different pieces of software. They don't talk to each other. You need to make a report like every week, right? Whatever. Well, you can't expect to have all 10 systems talk to each other on phase one. You can't do that. But let's say that you break it out into smaller pieces and you realize, oh, you know what? Our number one, number two priority is HubSpot and Razor's Edge. Those are the tools that we use the most. Perfect. Well, look at that. You have your first milestone. Your first milestone is HubSpot and Razor's Edge. Those two, they need to talk to each other. Need to, figure out how those two systems can talk to each other without the staff spending, 20 hours a week, reconciling data. Ahead of time, figure out what your dependencies are. Like, do you need board approval? Is there a CFO or a finance department that you need to get sign off on? That can take a while. They may have some questions. Are there holidays coming up? PTO? Like November, December? Like where fundraising and donor engagement is super high and people are on holiday, right? Here's one. This one, this one's a fun conversation to have, especially if there's like an external stakeholder who has their own set of expectations. So if you determine a realistic timeline, that is already probably going to be later than what an external person would want to hear. And that's an even more fun conversation when you add on an additional 15%. You have to include at least a 15% buffer, period. You will encounter surprises. Things will go wrong. That's just, real life. You can plan, like I've been on projects where I planned for, I thought every little thing. And I was like, I want to like make someone happy. I don't want to deal with the hard conversation of, saying it's going to take a few extra weeks. So I want to bump up the timeline by a month. We don't need that buffer time. And guess what? I really wish I didn't do that. Every 100% of the time, I didn't include the buffer. I wish I did. And 100% of the time I included the buffer, I'm glad I did. I'm sure you will too. And of course, as I've been saying, be realistic. All right, this one. Actually, this may be a little bit easier. You have to clarify who does what, especially if it's a larger organization. If you're a smaller organization, like a smaller nonprofit, you may have people kind of doing the same roles. You may only have like one or two names on this list. That's fine. But if you're a larger organization, especially, it's really important to clearly define who's doing what. Like you have someone who's responsible for doing the work, the person who's being held accountable. Those two can be the same person. It's fine. The person who's being consulted, and the person who's informed. And make sure that you're assigning these roles for each phase of the project, right? The last slide we talked about project decomposition, breaking it out into smaller phases, make sure that everyone knows what they're doing with every phase. One of my favorite sort of concepts that I've learned just a couple of years ago for a project I was doing was the concept of champions. A champion is really just someone who actively advocates for something to drive adoption and ensure success. Like, hey, we're talking about, so for example, I was working on a project for security. It was a multi-year undertaking, just a massive project. And there's a lot of organizational changes that we needed to make, but I was the security champion. So if we were talking about literally anything, and I was involved in that conversation, my primary concern was, how does this affect security? We had a like, it's a legal mandate. We had to meet some like security criteria, like all these rules, and like I was being held accountable for that as the security champion, right? You need someone in that role to actively advocate for that. Like, who's defining these requirements? Who approves what, right? And also, you need one final decision maker for these milestones. Like, who is the final say? I've seen projects, and I'm not kidding, I have seen, personally witnessed projects make zero progress for 9 months because this wasn't done. There's no final decision maker. Everyone kind of held like equitable power and authority, so there's no like one person who could make the final decision. 9 months with no progress. All those meetings, all those hours, thousands of hours, and nothing to show for it because of that. Right. All right. Next one is, okay, well, how are you going to sustain and support this project? Right. You have to make sure that your staff are aware of what's going on. Maybe that's virtual workshops if people are remote or hybrid. Maybe it's on-site. I love on-site. I mean, I love working remotely, but on-site's awesome because you have that engagement factor that you just don't get when you're working remotely, right? Draft resources like little written documentation, videos, walkthroughs, whatever. And again, talking about going back to the idea of assigning roles and ownership and who does what, assign a long-term project owner. If there's someone, if someone has a question about some project that you're working on, who do you ask? Oh, this one person. Perfect. Also, make sure that you establish some kind of feedback loop. What that means is, let's say that you're, post-launch, people are using this product or using the outputs of whatever your tech project is. Maybe that's MFA. Maybe that's converting an Excel workbook into a CRM like HubSpot or Razor's Edge, whatever. Make sure the people that are actually affected and using the output of this thing, the deliverable, get their feedback. What do they like? What do they not like? You are going to get some wildly amazing ideas on how you can improve their experience. Like, I just had a call today. Varsity developed some technology, some AI assisted technology. I had a call today with a customer that we're piloting this technology with. They had some awesome ideas that I wouldn't have even thought about if I didn't ask them specifically for feedback. We have this cadence with them, right? It's awesome. You need it. And last but not least, you gotta make sure that you're actually ready to take this on. Like, one thing is making sure that, again, people are aware of like what the updates are, where do they look for updates. Like, is it an email with a link to a SharePoint site? Is it something else, like a Confluence, like a wiki, a Teams wiki, whatever? Also, make sure that you actually budget for the long term and not just the actual cost or the price of the implementation. There is this idea of cost versus price. For example, it's really easy for us to budget and allocate resources for, let's say, implementing a new piece of technology. The price tag on that is $10,000. Whatever, doesn't matter. Just an example. But then you have the cost. The organization incurs a cost when you have to draft the documentation. You need to maintain the how-to videos. But if there's a product update that you leverage, we'll have to update the videos. There's a whole like support ticketing process, whether that's internal, another vendor, maybe that's with Varsity. the organization incurs a cost on that as well. Right, so they have all these different factors, and that sounds discouraging. It's like, well, why do we even do that to begin with? Like, if that's so costly to the organization, because it's not. It compared to the cost of not doing it. The cost of being prepared and ready and doing this final check before you actually launch and go for it, it's way less cost than if you just go for it, not do any of the preparation, none of the videos, none of the whatever, and then you have not only do you have to like redo work. Oh man, I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah, again, it's just more costly. Let's see, and of course, get that leadership commitment. Okay, so we just talked about like what the framework is, some common gotchas and all that stuff. Let's take a look at like a case study. And this is not completely made up. I mean, this is not like one for one exactly a project from a nonprofit, but this is heavily inspired by many real world projects that I have personally been involved with. So let's talk about. We've got a nonprofit. They provide family resources and support groups like a food pantry, parent to parent, maybe. We got mentorship, after school programs, all this stuff. And they have a whole bunch of different systems that they use for storing all kinds of different data. So for example, we got HubSpot, Razor's Edge, right? The big two. Maybe they use Voter Voice, QuickBooks for accounting, MailChimp, Excel workbooks. Maybe they have physical paper sheets, sign-in, sign-out sheets, intake forms. Could be so many different avenues of where data can go. And here's the primary frustration, kind of like what I've been referring to before. They spend too many hours manually reconciling data, meaning like syncing data from HubSpot to Razor's Edge. Like someone does that every single week, right? Using like an Excel workbook macro. They export, import CSVs or whatever. Maybe you don't even know what they do. Maybe the nonprofit has no idea what they do. They just know that they're paying someone all this money to do something that's like it takes a lot of time, and they can't generate accurate reports because none of the data is ever up to date. The data is inaccurate. It's a bunch of junk in there. This frustration is probably the number one most common problem I've seen in my last decade plus, working with similar organizations. So let's talk about it. Let's say this nonprofit attended this webinar and they're like, that varsity webinar that we went to? They handed us a worksheet with some questions and stuff like that. Let's walk through. So here's what their planning framework, like the questions and answers, here's what that may look like for them. So they're going to try and define the problem. Where the problem is, again, wide focus, is all their data is siloed, meaning it's all these completely separate, segregated systems that don't talk to each other. And they have to spend all this time like doing manual work. Well, they can't fix that problem all at once. So maybe the narrow focus is, well, specifically staff. Maybe it's one person, maybe it's a collective, doesn't matter. Either way, staff spends 20 hours a week manually reconciling data to create a fundraising report that we use every single week. And it takes all this time and it's also inaccurate. We have zero confidence that the report's even correct. Maybe the director has to check it and review it again. That's even more hours, right? And by the way, this problem here was identified by interviewing staff. Project coordinators revealed that they spend 20 hours, manually reconciling data, maybe removing duplicates or doing whatever else. So let's say that this nonprofit says, okay, well, we want to reduce the time it takes to reconcile all this data, and we need the data to be more accurate. Now, when we say increase data accuracy can be so many different things. In this case, we have defined it as the number of duplicate records in the report. And if we take a look at this, these two outcomes naturally kind of contradict each other, because without any changes, you can do one really well, like you can spend more time making sure the report's accurate, or you can spend, more, or I should say more of your effort to, do it faster. But it's really hard, maybe impossible, to do both at the same time without changing something. So they're like, okay, well, that's a good point. Maybe rather than do what we're currently doing, we're going to rethink what we currently do. And rather than do everything using Excel macros by hand, we're actually going to rethink how we enter data to begin with. And we're actually going to use a completely separate platform to enter data. And this platform is going to automatically sync all this data for us. Which, by the way, this problem right here, that problem is so common, especially with nonprofits using especially HubSpot and Razor's Edge, that there are several products out there in the market today just to solve that problem. It's crazy how common this problem is. Also, like Varsity, we've created custom integrations before in custom reporting platforms to also solve this problem. If you're interested, just a little anecdote. And they're like, hey, if you don't spend time doing data reconciliation, you can spend time doing more meaningful things. Like, hey, we can actually impact the community more, right? All right. So this nonprofit followed this advice and didn't assume, and had interviews, and it was revealed that data entry issues aren't the only frustration point. Maybe the fundraising report is also inaccurate because the way that they do donation acknowledgments is completely out of whack. Like, they miss it. It takes maybe weeks, if any, to even acknowledge it in the first place, to engage with the donors, if there was a gift or a donation or whatever. That's not great constituent engagement, right? But that was only revealed when we talked to the staff. It's one thing for leadership to have in a top-down look into the organization. It's another thing to actually talk to the people, frontline, boots on the ground, doing the work, that are aware of these issues, that they even exist in the first place. So we're going to document our current process. And let's say that for this nonprofit, they use Word. That's fine. But, shadow workflow. There's something revealed in this whole process. It's just funny because this happens all the time. So there are team members that are using a shared Google Doc, not even in a Microsoft Word doc. It's in Google. So no one can even search for it in Word or OneDrive or SharePoint or whatever to track contacts that failed to sync. No one documented it. It's just something that they've done, the staff has done, in order to make their lives easier, right? Remember, we talked about desire paths. People are going to find ways that are unofficial, not documented, just to make their lives easier. Not saying it's the staff's fault, by the way. I'm just saying it happens. And again, we prioritize. The absolute bare minimum that we need is we just want to sync data from HubSpot to Razor's Edge, so we can use Razor's Edge as the source of truth, right? Simple enough. We don't need bi-directional two-way syncing and real-time dashboards and all this stuff. Just sync it to Razor's Edge. That's all we need. All right, so what does success look like? Well, there's 3 metrics that we're going to track now. This nonprofit's going to track the reconciliation time per week, right? It's 20 hours on average. We have duplicate data rate. Maybe let's say there's 10%, something wild. 10% of all the data in these reports used for fundraising and donor engagement are just 10% of the data is just junk. It's not usable. It's very high, very scary, but it happens all the time. And then we also want to track our time to acknowledgement for new donations. If there's a new donation this organization, this nonprofit received, they want to make sure that they are timely in their responses to the donor. All right, so we have our baselines and targets, or sorry, we have our baselines, 20 hours a week, 10% duplicate data. So let's say, all right, well, we want to reduce that to 10 hours a week, 5%, and 4 business days for gift acknowledgement. May not be the best, right? It's like, oh, well, those numbers still look kind of bad, right? Well, that's why you define different tiers. Again, you can always improve, right? Maybe HubSpot, Razor's Edge, maybe those aren't the only things that you need. Maybe you need to integrate some other platform. Maybe there's data and Excel workbooks still living out there, right? Again, you just want to define and iteratively do this kind of process. This is not like a one-time, one and done kind of situation. Anyway, so this nonprofit, right? They're going to figure out how they're going to track and report on these results. In this case, they're going to build a report that's emailed every Monday to the director. Easy enough. Also, ideally, this would be automated. There are ways to automate this, but again. All right, so just a really simple way to structure a project, right? You got discovery, all right, what's the organization doing? You got designing. It's like, all right, well, here's kind of what we think we should be doing. You got implementation, which is, all right, we're going to do the work outlined in the design. We're going to pilot. So you're not just going to launch, you're going to pilot it with a few users or a few clients, whoever, to see, hey, is this doing what we want it to do? And then you're going to fully roll it out. Now, for the, actually, wait, oh yeah. So here, we got some internal dependencies like, hey, there's we need board approval, budget sign off. That happens, before we get too deep into the project. We also included like a 15% buffer for the implementation phase. That's why it goes across a couple months. And for the astute of you in the room, you may have noticed that it goes September, October, straight to January. Well, of course, that's because we got to be realistic. November, December are that says business months. They're the busiest months. That must have been autocorrect. They're the busiest months for this nonprofit. And so rather than trying to schedule a pilot and cram it in to November, they're going to push it out until January of the following year. Again, be realistic. Don't rush. So here, again, just defining roles. So you have the data analyst that builds the integration. Again, that can also be like a varsity type or like some other vendor that can build these custom integrations. It doesn't have to be someone who's in-house, but it can be. The person who is accountable and also consulted with, hey, those are both the program leads. Again, they can be the same people. You just have to clarify who's doing what. And the formed, again, is the executive director. The program leads, in this case, they drive user testing in the pilot phase of the project. So, they're the ones being consulted with because they have the most subject matter knowledge for this topic. So, when the pilot starts and we're going to try and validate, hey, is the solution actually working? They're going to be the champion of piloting this. And every conversation that they have about anything related to piloting, they're going to be involved in that conversation. They're going to be advocating, hey, how's this going to affect our pilot schedule? Oh, hey, you want to schedule this conference for 3 days? That's right in the middle of our pilot schedule that we've had for weeks now. Hey, if we're going to do that, we have to, figure it out, right? It can be all kinds of different ways to solve that problem. It's just important that the champion make sure that they're advocating for it. And in this case, they identified final decision makers. Of course, there's going to be more than just one. But in this case, again, just as an example for this case study, the CFO in this case will sign and approve the budget for the discovery phase. In this case, just to make sure that we schedule some onboarding and training and we budget for that time, we're going to schedule a 1-hour workshop before the pilot. So just to make sure that the staff, they're all aware, hey, we've been talking about this new technology. We're going to have a 1-hour workshop. It's going to be like a hands-on, it can be webinar, doesn't matter, or on-site, but it's going to be like a workshop. It's going to be, very hands-on Q&A, ask questions, jump in. We want you to use the new tech, We want to see how you like it, respond to it, answer any questions, whatever. You may sometimes you may find a couple blockers, like we cannot move forward because staff are encountering this specific issue. But most of the time, it's just to make sure that your staff, they're well prepared for this change, well in advance. Change is scary. No one likes change. So we want to make sure that we're, communicating that early. And of course, after the pilot, we're like, hey, this is in production, it's live, here's how it's working, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, strapped into how-to articles and all that good stuff. Again, assign a long-term owner. In this case, it's going to be the project lead. We got a feedback loop. So in this case, it's nonprofit for 1 month after launch, every single week, there's going to be a check-in. Hey, how's this app working? Or how is this, whatever the output of the project is. In this case, it's in like an integration app reporting thing. How is it working? Is it as expected? Is it better than expected? Worse as expected? Whatever. And then every month after that, again, always looking for ways to improve, and again, making sure that we have like a established, well understood support process. Like, hey, don't send the program lead a Teams DM, like specifying the issue. Go create a support ticket, unless if it's like absolutely urgent or whatever. Like have a certain process for it. And of course, in this case, they reached out to someone to create it. They didn't do it in-house. And so this vendor that they're working with, they say, hey, it's going to be $10K for the initial implementation. And then every year it's going to be $1,000 in ongoing platform maintenance. And so, they had to make a decision. Like, do they go with another product currently in the market? They can get someone set up right now, and the licensing is going to be like $300 a month for however many years? Or do they eat or invest the higher upfront cost and have lower monthly cost once the actual application is done? Software, a lot of the time, can be like an investment, right? So in this case, they decided, well, we have a higher short-term price, but a lower long-term cost. So if they're going to be using the same application for 3 years, they're going to be saving a whole lot of money, like thousands of dollars every year, because they decided to go with a custom solution. Again, I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's just what this nonprofit decided to go with. And of course, like, hey, we got executive sign off with like a 3-year funding commitment to ensure steady support. So that's an example of like a fictional but heavily inspired fictional case study of a nonprofit following this framework. I can tell you from personal experience that the study that we talked to in the beginning of this webinar, that wants to state as fact, like, tech projects don't fail because of the technology. They fail due to the planning aspect. I've been working in this space for over a decade, and that is 100% true. I don't think, and I'm trying, I'm not biased, or maybe I am biased, but I don't think I've ever worked on on any project where I said, wow, it's the technology's fault. The technology may be a bad fit. It may have been the wrong choice, but that's a different problem. And usually a symptom of a greater issue. The greater issue being the planning part. So if you follow the steps outlined in this framework, I don't want to guarantee anything, but I'm sure, I can almost guarantee that you will see much better success, fewer headaches. It's going to be, I think, a more difficult conversation in the beginning. In my experience, when we communicate with someone, hey, it's actually going to take 3 months longer than you want it to take, or whatever the timelines are, and you push that date back, those conversations can be difficult. But if you've done any projects before, I think you can agree with me when I say it is way easier to under promise and over deliver and like have the hard conversations in the beginning than it is if you over promise and under deliver and now you have to react to all of these bad conversations about, hey, Taylor, you promised this thing was going to be done. It's several weeks after that, it's not done. What the heck? What's going on? Right? Those are the conversations you want to avoid. Now, for those of you who, especially for those of you who may not know like who Varsity is and what we do, we work with nonprofits, healthcare, social impact, just a whole bunch of organizations in that space. And this is the kind of thing that we do all day, every day. Like I said, I'm a software engineer, but I work with a lot of tech projects, and that can be custom software development, integrations, SharePoint sites, data, really just anything like techie like that. I can absolutely help. Whoa, here it is. And so feel free to contact me directly. There's my email right there. Or you can visit our website, varsitytech.com. We got some, obviously some stuff there. And of course, we can help with everything that we talked about today. And a couple things. There is a PDF tech planning worksheet that we've put together. And it has, again, it's structured very similar to this webinar. It just has a bunch of questions that you can ask you and your team whenever you're preparing to start a new tech project. Like, hey, have we defined the problem? What is the problem? Have we identified what our outcomes are? Are they measurable? What are they? Stuff like that. For me personally, I like having a checklist, especially if it's kind of detailed like this, because more often than not, if there's a worksheet or a checklist at my disposal, there's always like one or two things where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm really glad I referenced this thing. I would have forgotten this like one detail or whatever. So I'm sure we can figure out how we can share that to everyone who attended here. But yeah, that's really all I had today. We have like maybe a minute and a half left. So I really appreciate you joining. I really hope this was of some value. Kosti, I'm not sure if there's something like some closing that we normally do here, but I would love to get some feedback on, hey, was this valuable or was this a waste of time? Just to make sure that we're able to provide some content to everyone that is actually worth the hour of their busy day. So, Kosti, was there anything else? All right, I'm going to assume that's a no. All right, everyone, I'm going to wrap up here. Thanks again for your time. Again, feel free to contact me if you want, ask me questions, all that good stuff, and we'll see you around next time. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.